Welcome to Earth, a Love Story. I'm your host, Robin Lassiter. This time on the podcast, I speak with author, experiencer, husband, father, and all-around great guy, Edson Freeman. Edson has just released his first book, Strange Light, Personal Accounts of UFOs, NDEs, and Other Enduring Mysteries. We had a wonderful conversation about what it's like to be a writer, his journey from skeptic to author in the field of the absurd, mysterious, and paranormal, how the phenomenon seems to tap experiencers for certain projects, and more. Before we get into it, I feel like I owe a report on the what and where and what the fuck of the last few months of my life. I've gone through a month-long solitary silent retreat. I'm no longer the community manager of the experiencer group, more on that later. I've traveled back and forth across the country in my trusty truck Denny multiple times, and oops, I fell in love. Remember when I said 2025 is the weirdest timeline with the most potential? Yes, that. I keep trying to wrap my head around how to sum all of this up, as well as the fact that the Armageddon dreams are back, how I'm making sense of those, how I'm wrestling with what is evolution through joy anyway, and is it okay to be okay as the world shudders in ways that modern humans have never collectively felt? Also, how to talk about the new Underworld journey that's arrived. Ereshkigel calling me down and in again and again, and how good it is to be back there. So much to say. So many threads and tributaries all woven together, and it's all defying orderliness. So instead, I'm going to give you bad poetry. You know you missed it. Weaving myself back and forth from west to east and east to west across these United States, whatever that means. This land that has seen death and birth and death again and seems to be facing a collective reckoning. I find myself for the third time now in Cookeville, Tennessee, where my grandfather dropped dead at the age of 43, at a gas station when he got out to check the tire pressure. I never knew him, but I'm finding myself stitching myself back and forth over the land where he lived and died, and for the first time I'm shocked to realize that I have a history here, a lineage here. In this unfamiliar land, my body feels it. My whole body feels like I'm running my tongue against an ache over a tooth that's trying to break through, up from beneath the gum. And I wonder why. I don't know why. I can't discern, so I send him love and thanks from me to the hereafter. Recognition that his death directly saved my father from getting drafted into Vietnam, and so somehow his death is maybe, probably, yes, directly responsible for me being born. I picked up my friend Trevor Shikazi's second installation in the terrible, glorious, and useful series published by WAWI. WAWI, W-A-W-I, stands for What Are We In?, which is a perfect catchphrase for these what the actual fuck times. This book, and the first in the series, are hard to put into words or categories, like poetry, like myth, like a fever dream, like a dharma talk, like all of those and none. The book fell open to page 111, and I read the following, which somehow seems to sum up what I've been circling with the phenomenon. In a dark night when I thought Providence had run empty, I asked my visitors what they meant, for they had told me they were family. Does this mean that I am loved? We don't have love. What do you have? Curiosity. It is akin to what you call love. Does it keep you alive? It is all we are. What do you do with your curiosity? We look for you. Why do you look for us? For we are incomplete. How are you incomplete? The missing piece is love. Can we love you? No, but you can love one another. Then what are you? Kin of the same force. I closed my eyes to try to sleep, and a light killed the dark behind my eyes. The missing piece, I think, is not a love they seek from us. They are not loveless. for they know full support. I see them as technicians of the ever-present resource. They are not diverged from that ultimate condition. It is what they feel when they open up their eyes. So what they want from us is not a love from us for them. If we worship as if they need it, we misconceive these gods. What they want from us, they have told us expressly, to love one another. And here, the last poem from me, I swear. Sometimes I fawn. I do the thing I know I shouldn't do to keep the peace. Actually, though, for such a long time, I didn't know the thing I shouldn't do. So I find myself in a month or a year in a place that I just can't bear. And I wonder why it's come to this. This thing I love has become dead in my arms. And then I have to extricate myself carefully so as not to wake the ghosts and wrath of those from whom I was keeping myself safe. And in some ways it's all in my head, but mostly it's me dancing with the dead and learning again and again to listen to my own true north, that voice within that arrives again and again and guides me. And sometimes it's straight into the fucking maw. But as excruciating as it can be, I learn and grow and find the grace again that comes with letting go. Next time, maybe I won't wait so long. Now, please enjoy my conversation with Edson Freeman. I'm very excited about this and very excited for you and this huge milestone that you've just achieved. It's amazing. How are you feeling?
It's been a wild journey. I mean, I didn't know exactly what I was getting into because, I haven't done this before. Mm-hmm. But I had a few nice people helping me along the way. And even the hard parts, I didn't mind. Even the parts that I didn't know what I was doing, I was out of my comfort zone, I was lost, I was frustrated. It didn't bother me. I remember saying to my wife at one point, man, if I could quit my job and do this full time, I'm pretty sure I would. I'm not there, but even if it's, just this is something that I can do when I hit retirement age or something, mm-hmm. that'll be a worthwhile thing to keep when I get older. So,
yeah. I was actually trying to think back about how you and I met, and I don't know that I remember exactly.
So I think it really started with, I don't remember how I found your podcast, but the audiobook at the beginning, I listened to it and I think I just reached out to you and I said, man, I loved your story. It was so compelling and everything about it just really hit home for me. I think I just emailed you out of the blue and said, hey, I loved your book. And we kind of had a little bit of a back and forth, and I don't remember exactly what I said, but something along the lines of, I wish that more experiencers were able to tell their stories. I know there's a lot of stigma around these kinds of stories, but they're so fascinating and so, I don't know, compelling. I don't know another word to use, and I think I said something like, I wish that I was imagining a book of short stories of these different experiences that people had. And I sort of jokingly said, can I manifest that into existence? And you said something like, yeah, I think you can. And I'm happy to help you if you need it. And I was like, oh shit, she turned it around on me.
It's like, you shall manifest it. It's arrived in your lap. So here we go.
Manifest is an interesting word because it can mean hope something comes into existence, or it can mean make something come into existence. And when you said that, I was like, huh, maybe I could do this, and then we just, crossed paths in a number of other areas, from that point forward. Mm-hmm. And then next thing you know, a year or more has gone by and I have a book out. So
yeah, amazing. That's right. I definitely remember that conversation and you, what I remember, and tell me if I have this correct, because we have spent a lot of time in shared spaces at this point, but I seem to remember that you may have had a few experiences, but don't necessarily or didn't necessarily think of yourself as an experiencer. Do I have that right?
Yeah. They were sort of synchronicity type experiences. And I think I told you a story and then I ended up retelling that story in the first chapter of the book about selling some houses out of the blue. My ex's house and my mom, who passed away, her house, sold both of those houses without ever involving a real estate, just from people sort of saying, "Hey, have you ever thought about selling this place?" My mom had been in real estate for most of her career. So at the time it was just like, man, this is what a lucky break, but looking back, I was like, that's a pretty big couple of coincidences that both aligned and everything. And then there were some other things that happened that were sort of on that same scale, where it was like, I don't know what to make of this, but it didn't feel like, like a big ghost story or a big near-death experience or a alien abduction or anything. It just was sort of like, oh, well, that's interesting. So I think where this all kind of started, I think, I wasn't really into any of this stuff even just a few years ago. I think the New York Times piece in 2017 kind of was like, oh, maybe there is something to this. And I just set it on the back burner and I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And then David Grush came along and sort of opened some more things up. And I was like, maybe I should start looking into this stuff. And, like a lot of people, you start out in that sort of nuts and bolts space where it's like, what are these things flying around? And I quickly got bored with that and ended up in the woo side of things, the places where things get weird and stories get confusing or compelling or raise bigger questions. And I know somebody at some point said to me, you go down one rabbit hole and then you go down another rabbit hole and then you go down another and you find out they're all connected. And that was my experience. I was like, there's no end to the fascination for me of looking into these things. And I think that's how I came into this space. Now, since then, I have had some more experiences happen. I've kind of, to some extent, sought them out, by hanging around with people who also have these experiences. And, and then there's been your book, the Chris Bledsoe book, some of the things that Mike Clellan writes about. These are things that drew me in further and further into these spaces.
Yeah. I would love to hear if you would like to share some of your more recent experiences. I know folks can get the original experiences that you were talking about in the beginning of your book, but would love to hear anything else you'd like to share. And also, I just, what I remember about the conversation that we had and your talking very earnestly about this idea, that I wish that more of these stories existed. Like I wish more people could tell these stories. And you also seem to have a sense of the stigma that comes along with it and how many experiencers do not want to be public and do not want to share their story. And that started out as my experience. I just absolutely did not want to talk about any of this stuff. And also the really dark, difficult times in my life. So it's not everyone's path to be public with this stuff. There's still enough of a stigma that you can even risk family relationships or jobs, things like that. Like it can really throw a wrench into things. And so what I heard from you when you talked about wishing that there was this book and that there was a place for people to tell their stories, I really felt this very earnest tenderness towards experiencers. And I'm at the time I was the community manager of the experiencer group. And I think as we started talking about it more, you said, if you know of anyone who would like their story told, please, reach out. And it's a very, like I was very protective and still am of the experiencer group, and of,
Right.
Who I put people in contact with. And I really felt your sincerity. And so I actively did that and wanted to connect you with people because I could really feel that you were, even though you didn't describe yourself as an experiencer other than having these, which, those count, certainly. That does count as the definition of experiencer, but I know what that feeling of like not knowing if that's the identity or the word for it, but feeling that you would hold these things very sacred and you understood the gravity of them. And it was exciting to watch you undertake this really big project. And you got some pretty extraordinary stories.
Yeah. And I think part of the challenge is just establishing that trust. There are people who are happy to share their stories to anyone, But there are people who, I mean, as I was talking to them, they're like, I've never really talked about this before. You know, that's a big responsibility. And I tried to make sure that I took that very seriously. So let me just walk through how I wrote this. I would talk to somebody. I'd do an interview, usually on Zoom, sometimes in person, sometimes other ways, but usually it was a video chat. And I would always start by making sure they were okay with recording. If they weren't, that's fine too, but it makes it a lot easier to go back and get the details right. And then I said, I'm not going to publish this without your full consent. Like, I'm going to let you read it when I'm done. I'm going to have you tell me what things don't quite hit right, or that are not quite accurate, or that just need a little tweak, or if you want me to leave it out. If you want anonymity to a small degree, a large degree, whatever you're comfortable with. And I did have a couple of people who decided well into the process that they weren't actually comfortable with their story going out, even with the anonymity and everything. And I was more than happy to just set those aside and say, you know what, this isn't the time, or maybe this will never be the time. That's fine. Because this isn't about exploiting people. This was about being a storyteller on someone's behalf, kind of. I think you asked about experiences that I've had since starting this. I've seen some interesting lights in the sky with some other people that were not planes or satellites. It, it's funny because when I started this journey, before I even really started thinking in terms of a book or anything, where I was just in that early stage of like, man, what if UFOs are a real thing? My wife and I were camping at a beach on the Outer Banks in North Carolina, a remote like state park. And we came out of our tent after dark and we went down to you got to go around some dunes to get to the actual beach. And we were sitting there on the beach, just staring out at this amazing sky, you know, just when you get away from the lights and everything, it never gets old looking up at the vastness of everything that's out there. And I remember sitting there thinking, wouldn't it be cool or weird or amazing if I saw something I couldn't explain? And I was just sitting there, and all of a sudden this like line of lights perfectly straight goes across the sky. And I was like, what is that? And it was like the universe was sort of teasing me, because that was just all that was Starlink satellite train going by. But I didn't know at the time. And I got on my phone and did some research, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's just. But then when we went to go back to the tent, we come around the dunes and there's these 3 really bright orange orbs in the sky just hanging there. And I'm like, okay, now this is something. I'm going to get my camera out. And when I got my camera out, I noticed that these 3 orbs had like a little bit of smoke trail off of them. And I stood there and I'm looking, and eventually figured out, again, going to my phone, that this was just, we were near Camp Lejeune in North Carolina, and they were doing these aerial flares for like, I think they're for like illuminating the ground, and they fall, but they fall really slowly. So I left there with these 2 like fake out moments, going, man, the universe is really toying with me at this point. But since then, I've seen some things that really didn't make much sense. You know, I was with a group at the Monroe Institute doing a gateway program, and we saw this spiral of lights. If you imagine, like, sometimes you'll see a dog toy or like little kids' shoes that have the blinky lights, the little LED blinky lights. It looked like that, but it was up near the trees, and it was going in a spiral upwards, blinking really fast. We all were like, whoa, what is that? And we got it on camera and everything. But what was interesting was the next day we were chatting about it, and we had seen some other cool orbs or something too, but that particular one we were chatting about, and we found that different people saw different colors. To me, it was clearly red with occasional white flashes. To somebody else, it was sort of a teal turquoise color, and somebody else it was green, and somebody else it was blue and white. And we were just like, okay, that feels pretty out of the ordinary. You know, we all had pretty well decided that there was no way that was like a firefly or a plane or anything else. But the fact that our perceptions were not consistent in terms of just the color, everything else we agreed on. But yeah, that was eye-opening. You hear about experiences where 2 people see the same thing, but then when they tell it, it's different. And in the past, it seems like people would go, oh, well, that destroys the credibility of it because they're inconsistent. But I think it's more that there's something else going on there, that our perceptions are being manipulated, or we each take it in from a different perspective or in a different way. And somehow it can be different from one person to another, what they actually see. I can't back any of this up, but that's just my sense of it after talking to a lot of people.
Yeah, it's reported, and actually as you were saying that, I was thinking in cases like that, it to me sort of gives it more credibility that everyone didn't see the same thing, because you hear it over and over again, that some people don't see it at all, or one person sees it this way, one person sees it that way. So the fact that you have a group of credible people who are seeing something and then report differences that are notable enough that it's really strange that we didn't all see the same color, that actually flips over to more credibility for me at this point. Although, as my time in this realm has gone on, I care less and less about some external sense of like validation or credibility. I think it's so personal. Even as you were talking about like Starlink, those satellites, I've seen that. And it was one of the most ontologically shocking moments that I've had, because it's so surreal to see something like that go across the sky. And so I
Right,
love that
right.
you had that little bit of ontological shock and then these three orbs that make no sense above your tent. And I'm not saying that there's anything, anomalous there necessarily, except for that you asked and you had these two experiences that were prosaic, but that gave a sense or a feeling of what it would be like to see something. And for me, that's like, it's just a classic kind of trickster, high strangeness element of some of this stuff.
Right, right. Yeah. Yeah. And that was a conversation we had the night we were doing the sky watching out at Monroe, was because there were things that would go over and we're like, oh, that's probably just a satellite because it's moving in the same direction, and it's steady and it's not changing direction, and it has all the hallmarks of just a satellite going over. And somebody in our group was like, that's still pretty cool though. Like,
Mm,
we're looking at a thing going by in space from 1,000 miles up or whatever. Why can't we just be awed at the fact that that is happening?
mm.
So yeah, there's definitely that element of, wow, I never seen that before.
Yeah,
That still counts, right?
it does. I mean, I think that actually it's one of the like gifts of the phenomenon is that in my experience in life, one of the many things that it's done is made life more like a lucid dream, so that all of reality becomes kind of strange and magical versus just this one part of reality being that way. It's like, whoa, we're humans on a planet moving around in these bodies and having these experiences. This whole thing is really wild, actually.
Yeah, if you step back, it is pretty strange.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, interesting. Have you had any other experiences that you want to share or that have stood out to you in all of this?
There was one that happened just after my mom passed away. So she had lived in a little house in Daytona Beach, within walking distance of the beach. Like, I think I knew before she did that whenever she hit retirement age, she was going to live at a beach. Like, that was just, she was so drawn to that kind of environment. And so she moved down there after I was out of college and everything, and lived in her little house there, with the sandy backyard and the kumquat tree in the front and her cats and her dogs. She used to do animal rescue. And when she died of lung cancer, and it was her second go around. The first time she beat it, but then it came back, maybe 10 years later. And she kind of was like, I'm pretty sure this is going to be it. And so, that bittersweet, like, at least we have a little bit of time
Mm.
still, but when she got toward the end there, I went down to see her in the hospital and, spend just a little bit more time with her. And, after she passed, her neighbors all knew her. Like, that was one of those little neighborhoods where everybody knew everybody, and they had all lived there for a while. And her next door neighbor came over to sort of comfort me, give me a hug, and say I'm so sorry and everything. And I came back maybe 2 months later and saw the neighbor again. And she was like, I saw something last night that I wanted to share with you. I hope it's okay to share this with you. It was your mom. And she just wanted me to tell you, I see you. Now, what was interesting about that, other than just like the feeling that you get when someone says something like that, and it comes across with full sincerity and everything, it really touched me. But also, my mom was not a religious person. As she was nearing the end, she was kind of like, I kind of hope that there's nothing after this. I hope that I'm done and I'm out. And if there is something more, I hope that it's something nice. I don't remember exactly how she said it, but she was like, I would prefer to just have nothing. I would prefer to just go out. So the neighbor saying that my mom had this message that I see you was sort of like, one, I was going through it at that point in my life, because to make a long story short, in January of 2016, my ex, or my soon to be ex, we weren't even completely divorced at that point, but she got arrested and went to prison for a long time. We'll leave that story for another time. But, and then 6 months later, my mom passed away. And so I went from being, one type of life to a completely different type of life. I'm a single dad. I've lost my mom. I've got a couple kids with special needs. And I had this house that I had to figure out what to do with because my ex was no longer living in it, but the mortgage was still in my name. It was a whole mess. And I was asking everybody I could find for help. I was just like, I set my ego aside and I was like, I can't do this. I need people. It's either that or just crash out and, but I can't do that to my kids, so it was a rough stretch there. And for that message to be, I see you, it sort of conveyed two things to me. One was there is something after, and two, she was looking out for me, or she was at least watching me navigate it mostly successfully, doing my best. It was one of the hardest stretches of my life. But so that was another experience that kind of, I didn't know what to make of it at the time because I wasn't in that space, but I'm so glad it happened because I still have that in my memory and I can process it a different way, so.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah. That's beautiful. When people talk about people that have passed on the podcast or talk about these experiences, I just really feel them with us when that happens. So just a
Yeah.
lot of gratitude to your mom. And yeah, I can see the house and the neighbor, and it's a beautiful story. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, tell me about this book. I have a memory that I was like, you can totally do this, and here's my team, which was
Yeah.
Suzanne Chancellor, my editor, and Mike Cleland. And I say my team, like I assembled this team. It's like, no, these people just arrived out of the woodwork to help me because they were lovely and
Right.
amazing, And
Yeah.
then I was like, here's these lovely, amazing people that you could totally work with. So I know that you had that experience with them as well. I know what it's like to write a book. I found it very hard and also something that I would not have traded for anything. And
Mhm.
so how was it for you?
What you said resonates a lot with me. Like it was a hard thing, but you and Suzanne and Mike were like my mentors. I couldn't ask for better because not only did you have, all three of you together had all this prior experience and knowledge to help me find my way through this, but also you all have experience in this topic, which, I don't know what an editor from a traditional book publishing world would have done with my book, but I was glad that I was working with Suzanne because she had that perspective that I needed. And same with you and same with Mike. I think one of the pieces of advice you gave me early on was to make this in service to experiencers. And that stuck with me because it was always about telling these stories in the best way that they could be told, at least to the best of my ability. And having other people supporting me who were coming from that same perspective of wanting to do this right and do this well. And it's almost a sacred trust when somebody gives you their story and says, yes, you can share it with the outside world. I didn't want to take that lightly. And yeah, the stories that I was able to collect and the people that I was able to connect with, I mean, they were all fascinating people and all just really nice and generous with their time. And, you know, sometimes I'm coming back to a month later saying, you said this phrase, what did you mean? Or I'm trying to make sure I interpret this correctly. And, you know, just all these little nuances that were important, or they felt important to get right, you know? And then, yeah, the editing, the editing and editing and editing. I went into it. I was so sort of overconfident going into the editing process. I'm like, I've had 3 other people read this who all have writing backgrounds and they all cleared it. Like I'm a good writer and they got it all. And Suzanne got a hold of it. And it was just like, you know, the old middle school red pen nightmares. She had it marked up so much, but I really tried to go into it with like, this is all in service of making this book better. I'm not going to take it personally. And she really elevated this book from pretty good to really great. Like I'm proud of what we put together collectively. And I just got done sending signed copies out to all of my people who had chapters in the book. And I wanted to have them be able to hold it in their hand and see their story in print. There was one of my subjects who did request anonymity, but he was like, can I before it was ever published, he was like, I sent him the draft and he was like, can I share this with my bandmates and my mom and this person and that person? Cause they always think I'm crazy, but like it gave it credibility. It gave it, you know, just coming from a different voice. Suddenly he had this confidence or this willingness to go to them and say, look, it's not just me, right? It's somebody believed me. That felt different. That felt special.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried to ride that with every story. I tried to give that same type of treatment to it.
Yeah. It's beautiful. I mean, there's so many things in here that seem to exist in this anomalous world, the umbrella of the anomalous or the phenomenal. You know, one of them being that whether someone tells their story anonymously or publicly, or a combination of the two in this case, that there is something healing about the storytelling if it's received by a space of belief and love and acceptance and safety. There's an alchemical process of healing that happens. I've seen it over and over with clients, with myself, you know. I mean, like it's this big part of us that many of us put away as something that we can't talk about, something that cannot exist in our life. It's just not okay that this is there. And it creates this well in the mind of this sort of trapped psychic energy that needs to be held back and separated. And when we get to tell our stories in a safe space, there is a real transformation that can take place. And so that's a beautiful service you provided. And also, you know, I think you probably know this. This is a really something that I firmly believe, that it seems like the phenomenon taps people for certain projects. It just seems to be the case. And so this is a great example of that, you know, that this is your project. This is what you were tapped for. And then following that call and ending up with creativity. You know, this is what the phenomenon does again and again, is sort of take us a little bit off center and rearrange our lives and then ask us to do something creative in service to really the phenomenon. You know, and you are in service to the experiencers, but it's as if the phenomenon is trying to use a lot of different people as mouthpieces for it. And that's a very strange thing. And there's all kinds of, you know me well enough to know I'm like, what about consent? And how much agency do I have? And did I, you know, was I manipulated into this, or was it a good thing? Like that's always on my mind, you know. That's indicative of my trust issues. But yeah, there is something that's very human about the process that it seems that you went through with this. You know, you got a call, you heard from the muse, you had a mission, you accomplished it, it resulted in creativity, healing, transformation. Like it's all there. It's really cool.
Yeah, and you know, as you were talking about that, one of the things I was thinking about was I knew early on that the only way that made sense to me was to not go down the path that so many people have gone down with, okay, here's a grainy photo and here's some cross-reference phone records and here's some historical documentation. Like there's a place for that. I don't, you know, I'm not disparaging anybody who takes that approach, but I was like, I don't really care about any of that. Like that detracts from the story to me. And one of the people that read the final product commented on how it actually makes it feel more believable to people outside, because you're not zeroing in on these little questionable pieces of quote unquote evidence, and you're just hearing testimony. Essentially, you're just hearing the emotions and the memories and the history of this person throughout their life. In some cases, you know, there are some stories that are so big it's just one experience and that turned into a whole chapter, but a lot of cases it's a lifetime of these weird things going on that all seem to weave together somehow. I think I have more questions after writing the book than I did before, but I don't see that as a problem. Like,
yeah, my experience reading the book was my emotional state, and my experience when I was reading it was like, oh God, there's just nothing like a good experience or story. That it's one of the best parts of all of this is just like hearing a really good testimony, like you said,
mm-hmm.
because it's if the person is being as honest as they can, which is hard because so much of it
Mm-hmm.
makes no sense. So there's even a lot of like self-censoring, like, well, this happened, but that doesn't make any sense. So how can I talk about that? But if there's, you know, if experiencers can be as honest as possible with even the weird details, it does become this koan, you know, this kind of unresolvable story where things are weird. And
Yeah.
there's something so compelling about that. I think that that's why there's so much hunger around the UFO topic and all of these topics, because it just breaks reality a little bit. And that's a good thing. It's a really good thing because we think we know what it is, and clearly we don't. Clearly we don't.
Right. Right. Yeah. The more you look at it, the less you know what the hell is going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I do want to shout out the cover artist because I haven't
Mm-hmm.
mentioned him. Tim Lee. He's based in Atlanta. He's got this studio called Rabbit Run Studios. I gave him some sort of rough outlines of stories from the book, and I was like, I was trying to think of things that would be visually like that would work for a book cover. You need something that's a little less abstract, and yeah, I gave him some different angles to go, and we ended up zeroing in on this white buck, and people will see it and are just drawn to it.
Mm-hmm.
That's another piece of magic that kind of happened in this process, was me reaching out to an artist who I liked his work, and I was like, hey, do you do commissions? And he's like, not too many, but what do you got? And I told him about this book, and he's like, oh yeah, I'd do a commission for that for sure.
Yeah,
That
the
was
cover is really, really beautiful. Yeah, very evocative and compelling and makes you want to see what's going on inside.
Yeah, it was funny because it is based on one of the stories, and there was some debate about where that story should go in the book. Should that be at the beginning? Should that be at the end?
Mm-hmm.
And I just felt like in the middle somewhere felt right. You know,
Mm-hmm.
the weird thing about this type of book is the chapters could have gone in any order.
Mm-hmm.
So it was almost like putting tracks on an album. You want a little bit of this, and then you want to switch it up a little bit to that. And yeah, finding the right order was really just intuition at work. I think I had one person advocating for that story being at the front and another person advocating for it being at the end. And I was like, this 11 feels right. I don't know why, but that's where it's going to go.
That's great. Yeah,
So,
that's great. Well,
yeah,
I'm so excited for you, Edson. Congratulations. It's
thank
wonderful.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
Do,
excited too.
yeah, you should be. Do you want people to be able to reach out to you directly for copies of the book? Does that sound overwhelming? I don't know. How much do you want people to call you, to email you?
Yeah, I'm set up for that to some extent. I've got a website, strangelightbook.com. If you want a signed copy, you can request one there. I've got links to order it from a couple different places as well. So I was trying to give people options. One of the things that I did was put a link to my favorite local bookstore, because
Amazing.
anybody can order from it. But I think you probably know, as a fellow independent author, there's pros and cons to buying from Amazon or buying directly from me or buying from a local bookstore. They all have their good and bad points. So whatever makes people happy, they're interested, follow your heart.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Wonderful. Yeah. And then you'll come back on when you write your next book. No pressure.
Yeah. That's already, those wheels are already turning in my head. At least I'm not ready to start on anything, but if there are people that want to reach out to me and talk to me about sharing their story, I'm happy to hear from them. There should be a contact information on my little website there. So, but yeah, thank you for having me on here. I'm so glad that I got to talk to you first, because you were a big part of this journey for me. So
yeah, and just such an honor. Thank you so much, Edson.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much to Edson. You can find his book, Strange Light, by checking the show notes. And coming soon, David Coleman will be making regular appearances on Earth, a Love Story, as we explore together the messages that seem to want to come through us as a duo, as an evolving conversation. I can hardly say the thing lately if I'm not saying it in conversation, so I'm super excited about that. And there are other special guests coming soon, I promise. And I'm noticing a change in the flavor of the podcast. I'm very excited about that as well. If you'd like to connect with me and other like-minded folks who are exploring the depths and heights of being incarnate on this planet at this time, of the apocalypse, of the phenomenon of the goddess, the body, somatics, spiritual and developmental evolution spurred by the mysterious and absurd, come hang out with us in Patreon. Join at the Earth Lovers tier and get access to 2 live Zoom calls a month where the community comes together to share in the unfolding. This space is mature, thoughtful, welcoming, and held with community guidelines that encourage turning towards the self with responsibility and courage. You can find information about Patreon, my one-on-one offerings, and more by visiting robinlassiter.com.